Ladies and gentlemen, here we go, episode 32. But before we begin, something new for the podcast for 2018, and actually I hope for the future of the podcast. I think I had alluded to this previously, maybe at the kickoff to 2018, but I am going to continue to devote time to the podcast to try to make it as good as I possibly can. I'm not a huge fan of doing things in a half-assed manner. And with that, I have recently been approached by a few companies that are interested in sponsorship of the podcast, which when I look at it, at first I was hesitant to even speak with anybody because I started this podcast on the recommendation of somebody that I think very highly of and somebody who's very successful in the space. And I never thought for a second that it was going to be something that would have an economic benefit. And here you go, 32 episodes down the road, I was hit up for sponsorship. I was thinking about that and the desire to make this as good as possible, and I realized that money helps when it comes to the podcast. As an example, the microphone that I'm speaking into is brand new. It's not free, surprisingly enough. And I think with companies that want to support me, especially if I use them in my everyday life, there's no reason to not work with them because it would allow me to focus more on the podcast and continue to develop it and make it better. So, having said that, this episode today, episode 32, the first ever Cleared Hot podcast episode to have a sponsor, is brought to you by Onnit. Now, if you listen to podcasts, specifically the Joe Rogan Experience, you already know what Onnit is all about. But it's a supplement company, and I'm probably describing that incorrectly because I know they do much more than that, but that's specifically what I'm talking about. And let me say one thing about supplements. Supplements are great, but in my opinion, if you're focusing more on the supplementation than you are, let's call that the micronutrients. If you're focusing on the micro instead of getting your life in order at the macro level, and what I mean by that is a balanced diet, rest and recovery, an exercise routine, if you don't have those two things balanced, I'm going to tell you right now, you probably don't need to be doing supplementation. If you eat like a garbage disposal, it doesn't matter really what the vitamins and minerals that you shove in after that are going to be. They're not going to give you the benefit that you want. So focus on the macro first, and then let's get into the micro. So specifically when it comes to Onnit, if you are interested in picking up some Onnit supplements, they have created a landing page for me, and it is very easy to remember. As a matter of fact, if you cannot remember what the website is, I want you to never listen to an episode again because it's onnit.com/hot, as in the opposite of cold. ONNIT.com/hot. And you'll see in the upper left-hand corner when you type that in, there'll be a little logo of the podcast album. It says Cleared Hot on the top, and then that picture of me jumping out of the plane. And you'll get up to 10% off. And it lists 3 of the products that I use on basically a daily level. And I've been using these products for well over 2 years at this point. The top one is the Total Primal Care, which I would describe that is, it's a multivitamin, but it's more. There's more stuff in there than just vitamins, and there's a day pack and a night pack. I'm pretty sure that, actually I know for a fact, Dudley, when we travel together, I always see him taking the same things, and I think I actually started taking these based off of his recommendation. On the road, maybe not eating optimally or as often as you want to, take that day pack in the morning and then take the night pack at night. Underneath that is the Alpha Brain, which is a nootropic. I personally have played around with days where I don't take Alpha Brain and days that I do. I do feel a difference on the days that I do. And then the third one is the MCT oil. Now, I personally believe that MCT oil should come with a massive warning label on it. I love it. I put it in my coffee every morning. But if you've never taken MCT oil and you buy some of this MCT oil, please be very careful with your dosage or you're going to have what I'm going to call an accident. Don't take a massive dose of this and then think you're going to go on a cross-country drive or get into an airplane. you're going to have serious problems. You need to gradually and incrementally increase your dose of MCT oil, or you need to wear a diaper. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So if supplementation is something that you're interested in looking at, like I said, focus on your macro first, then maybe dive into the micro. And you're interested in a company that has very high quality supplements and high quality ingredients, check them out. Onnit.com/hot. All right. Episode 32 with Jack Carr. Carr with 2 R's, not 1. Jack is a man of many skills. He is an author, which is, I'm not going to say it's the premise of the conversation that we had today, but it's what we opened with. He is a new author, or about to be newly published author. His book, The Terminal List, is coming out on the 6th of March. This podcast is going to be released on the 5th of March, so the timing could not be better. In addition to being an author, he's also a retired Navy SEAL with 20 years in service. He, much like myself, was enlisted and then went to the officer ranks, also known as becoming a trader. He served on the West and East Coast, and we actually started in the same Buds class. So I've known Jack, even though I struggle to keep saying that name, and you'll understand why later on in the podcast. I've known him for a really long time. We started our careers together. They went in different directions, and the community it's a very small community, but it's a very large community. And I sometimes struggle to get that point across to people. I'll meet people in airports or wherever it may be. And, the question is, hey, do you know Tom? I'm like, I'm going to need some more information than that. Yeah, Tom. He's like 6 foot tall. He's got blonde hair. He's a SEAL. You don't know him? And the reality is, no, I don't know Tom. And quite frankly, I didn't know a lot of the people who were in the building next to me. Unless you were in the operational element that I was working with, I might have a passing knowledge of your last name. But unless I or other people worked at a day-to-day level, the community is microscopic in comparison to many others, but it's also huge in the respect that you're so focused, you don't actually know that many people that make it up. So I completely went off topic introducing Jack. So author, retired SEAL, started together, amazing career, multiple combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, out of the military now. In addition to being an author, he does public speaking, and he's also a consultant in the tactical space. So like I said, he's a man of many talents, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. Cleared Hot, episode 32, coming at you.
Okay, I got the red smoke. Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
There's a ton of stuff I want to talk to you about, and I think the only way it'll make sense, I think we should go backwards in time.
Okay.
So, you're definitely a Renaissance man.
Ooh, I don't know about that.
Well, I'm going to call you that.
Okay.
A man of many skills, and one of them that I was surprised to hear about is that you are an author, and you just finished writing a book. The book's getting ready to come out, so I'm actually going to give it to you because I want to hear about your book. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the author's name.
Got it. Let's do it. I'm ready.
Fire away, man. So
all right.
When does the book actually come out?
Yeah, so it comes out next week, 6 days from now on March 6th. So I'm not sure when this thing airs, but when this thing airs, it might already be in stores, but March 6th.
I'm thinking I'm going to put this up Monday, which I have no access to my calendar, but that's going to be close. 2 or 3 days before it comes out.
That's right, the day before.
That's going to be perfect timing. So
awesome.
I'm going to give it to you, the author, to go ahead and tell us or me about the book. Even though I've read it, I'm sure I would actually murder the description you would like it to be titled as.
Oh, great. No, thanks so much. I'm glad you got to read it, although you did get it, what's called a galley copy or an advanced reader's edition, which is essentially still a rough draft, and it goes through 3 other iterations of edits after that is printed. So the copy that is in the mail to you right now that was next day aired, that didn't arrive next day apparently, is the actual final hardback edited edition. So it's a much cleaner copy. But yeah, it's a book about revenge, and I decided to come out of the gate with that because that's what I liked reading as a kid. I loved reading books by Nelson DeMille, by Stephen Hunter, by David Morrell, Tom Clancy. I love these books that had that theme of revenge. And I love movies that had the theme of revenge also. So that really resonated with me growing up, and it still resonates today. And I think it really goes back because it's such a primal theme. It's something that's just in our DNA. It's something that we talked about around the campfire, and it's been told time and time again in stories throughout time. So I wanted to come out with something very primal and hard-hitting out of the gate. So it's a story about revenge without constraint. And the main character, James Reese, is a Navy SEAL. And that made sense just because he spent 20 years doing that sort of thing. So I had some background there. But he essentially takes the skills that he learned, 1 in training, 2 in combat, but 3 from the insurgency and from the terrorists that he'd been fighting for over 16 plus years at war. So he essentially comes back to this country and becomes an insurgent as he unravels a conspiracy that killed his teammates downrange, killed his family here in this country, that has ties to political leaders, to people in his own chain of command, to the pharmaceutical industry, and to the financial sector. So he comes up with a list and starts working his way up it, putting guys in the ground through various means that he's learned over his life.
I'm not going to lie. I have a list myself. The only thing is I'm not going to actually action that list.
I think I'm a couple of guys out there that have these lists.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a couple guys. Let's just say I have. I'm keeping tabs. It's not written down anywhere, but
probably wise.
Yeah, there's
at least not electronically.
No kidding. There's some targets of opportunity that I may have to do something about at some point in my life. But I mean, I liked revenge books as well, and thriller books, but I never had the desire to write one. And you and I have known each other. I mean, we'll get to this. We went through Buds together all the way back in early '97.
Yeah, 20 plus years.
Yeah, I had no idea that you were interested in writing. So, what was the turning point from enjoying those books and movies to actually wanting to write a book yourself?
Yeah, so 2 things I wanted to do since I was a little kid, and I remember it very distinctly because I was in 2nd grade, 7 years old, and I saw a black and white movie called The Frogman, and didn't see the whole thing because it was just I could only watch TV between the commercials of the football games my dad was watching, so I'd switch the channel, had 2 minutes to watch whatever war movie was on the opposing channel against Sunday football, and then 2 minutes would pass and I'd run up and I'd flip it back to football. But in one of those weekends, there was this black and white movie that showed guys swimming up over the beach, putting explosives on obstacles and blowing them in advance of a conventional force landing. So I asked my dad, hey, who are those guys? And he said, well, the movie's called The Frogman, so those are frogmen. And I said, well, what's a frogman? And he said, ask your mother, because football was on. So I asked my mom, and she was a librarian. So soon thereafter, we went down to the local library and did a little research. And that's early 80s, so there's hardly anything written about SEALs in the early 80s. There's a couple mentions in books about frogmen and SEALs in Vietnam, a couple magazine articles, but that was it. So you could pretty much read everything there was to read about SEALs in about 4 different magazines or books. And what I came away with was, hey, these guys are pretty tough. This training looks like it's the hardest that you can go through. So from age 7, they had me. But at the same time, because my mom was a librarian, I was always surrounded by books. So from a very early age, I was read to every night as a kid, and I started reading very early and transitioned to more adult books, probably earlier than most. And most of those books were all about the military. They were political military thrillers, and I just loved them. So I knew I wanted to do those 2 things: 1, become a frogman, and 2, write. But really, going into the military had to come first, because as you know, when you're in the teams, you have to be focused on the mission. You have to be focused on the guys because that's what you owe them and their families and the country. So you can't really have other things that you do. At least I couldn't. So as I was transitioning out and I wasn't taking guys downrange anymore, then that's when I switched gears and said, okay, it's time to pursue that other passion in life, and let's start writing. So started writing, and actually I have a co-author in this who's a dear friend of mine, Keith Wood, and he comes from the pharmaceutical background, which is why there's some of that pharmaceutical stuff in there and why the descriptions are so accurate. So just a dear friend of mine, and he had the same dream since he was a little kid, and it turned into a great partnership so we could bounce ideas back and forth with each other and edit each other's work. And the result is the Terminal List. So I'm fired up.
Did you write at all while you were in the teams? I mean, I'm assuming you were still thinking about it. Did you journal at all? Did you voraciously take notes? Nothing?
Nope, none of that stuff. I was just most of my reading was all the nonfiction stuff based on where we were going in the world, because I didn't want something to happen to one of the guys downrange, because I was too lazy to read a book about what was going on where we were headed. So I was always studying the tactics of our enemy, studying their politics, their religion, their economy, trying to just get a good solid picture of the conflict in which we're engaged, so I could make better decisions on the battlefield under stress. So that was really my focus for those 20 years, particularly since 9/11. That was the focus. But when I got back, I had, from my last deployment to Iraq, I had a couple of years left in. I knew I was getting out. I was going to a job at Buds where I was not going to take guys downrange anymore. And so I had a little time to think it through. And then as we got closer to that retirement date, then I started writing. And it ended up being very personal, as you can probably tell from, even though it's a work of fiction, but all those emotions that James Reese feels going through that book, those came from somewhere. Those came from something real that happened to me over those 20 years or over the course of my life. And I took those emotions and wrapped them into a fictional story.
Yeah, when I read it, obviously you and I share a lot of the same DNA in our background. So many of the things, including the locations and just small stuff that probably most people, maybe they would catch, maybe they wouldn't catch, whether it's a description of gear or a particular item. Like that stuff, to me, I see those things and it kind of it warms my heart a little bit. And I tell you what I like most about the book is that it's going to go into the fiction category instead of the nonfiction category, because I think the nonfiction category, when it comes to the SEAL teams and SEAL individuals and SEAL careers, is, what's the word I want to use? Saturated is the word that I'm going to go with.
Right. So, that's a tough one.
It is a tough one. And, people ask me all the time if I ever have a desire to write a book. The answer is that I don't. And then they'll ask me, what do I think about people writing those books? And my response is, they have the right to do what they want to with their experiences. However, it's not the choice that I would make.
Right.
But I like this book because I would say there's a lot of truth, or it rung very true to me, even though it's going to fit into that fictional category. And I think it's a good blend of fiction and reality. Because I was going to ask you how much of your own life is rolled into those experiences that make it into the book.
Yeah. So as you know, the background of the main character, James Reese, is very, very similar to mine. Although he's a lot smarter, a lot wittier, a lot better shape than I ever was or could ever be. Of course, it's fiction. You can take some literary license, I think they call it. So there's all that. But his background is very similar to mine, being prior enlisted, then becoming an officer, most of that, all of that stuff. Like I said, it was very therapeutic to write and get all those emotions out and do something with them. From how do you feel about
man.
It is. It was great. It was much more personal than I expected it to be. I knew it was going to be about revenge. I didn't know how much of my background was going to make it into that main character as I started writing, but it ended up, quite a bit made it in there, just from everything from how one feels about senior leadership making decisions that might be a little bit disconnected from the guys on the battlefield, how that feels, how it feels to go downrange and put bullets in just do the job. So just how I felt about that made it into the main character.
So from a practical perspective, if you didn't write while you were in, and then you started thinking about writing when you were getting ready to get out, the book is, it's hundreds of pages long, obviously an undertaking that's going to take some time. Where did you actually start? Do you think of an architecture in your head, like an overall story arc, and then you start trying to fill the pieces in? And how long did it take? Kind of walk me through your idea, the process you went through, and how long it took.
Yeah, so the idea sparked. I knew I was going to do something. I was going to write something, and I didn't want to be 90 years old on my deathbed looking back and saying, I should have given that writing a try when I was a little younger. So I think the idea sparked, I think, in December of 2014. It just kind of came to me. I knew I was going to write, didn't know exactly what it was going to be about. Then the spark hit, and it was, okay, revenge without constraint. Okay, what does that story look like? What's that framework? So started making an outline, and a very basic outline at first, and then just thinking through the storyline and then filling that in until it made some sort of sense. There were still some questions in there, and I'd have those questions written out in the outline, and then I just started writing. And as I got closer to the middle of being quote unquote done, because as I learned, once you're done, then the editing starts, and that's when you really do a lot of work. But when I got to that kind of middle, as far as just page number word count goes, I was filling in the outline as I went along. So as I wrote and a new chapter would come up or a new part of the story would come up, I'd fill that into the outline. But then once I hit that halfway point, then I discarded the outline entirely and just continued to write, just free flow writing. It took about a year and a half because I started it a little bit before I got out as I was making that transition during that last year. So about a year and a half to completion. And then from there, it was the editing that took the time. So I sent it out to some beta readers, to some friends, and got some feedback, and just kept tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it, and then sent it off to Simon and Schuster. And the only reason it actually made it to Simon and Schuster is because Brad Thor, who's another author in this genre, writes about a character named Scott Harvath, who's also a former Navy SEAL. I talked to him, and he could not have been nicer with his time. Authors get asked all the time, "Hey, I have this book. What do you think I should do?" And he took time and he talked me through. He said, "Hey, you know what? I know a friend of yours. He told me about some of the things you did in the SEAL teams. I've never done anything like this for anybody before, but if you finish this, I will send it to Simon and Schuster for you. I can't guarantee they'll open the package. Can't guarantee they'll read it. Definitely can't guarantee they'll like it, but I'll send it to New York for you." And sure enough, he said, "I won't help you as you're going through. I won't read chapters. I won't give you advice, but if you finish, I'll send it." So he said, "When are you going to be done?" And I said, "A year from now." And sure enough, a year to the day, I called him back, and he sent it off to New York, and they ended up reading it and loving it. And next thing you know, we have a book deal.
That's awesome, man. I actually know that author. I randomly picked up one of his books in an airport, which I spend far too much of my life in. And I get it. And I flip back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. And I read one of his books, and I actually really liked it. So if you ever talk to the guy, tell him he gets the 2 thumbs up from
I will.
Andy Stumpf review.
I will definitely let him know. He's a great guy, so kind. And actually, it's very interesting. Everyone that I've met in this industry, in the publishing world, has been so welcoming to me and so nice. And I expected the opposite. I expected, especially other authors, I expected them to be like, "Okay, here's competition that's coming in. Let's keep him at arm's length. Don't want to help him." Exactly the opposite has been true. Every single person, every single author out there in the genre has been more than welcoming, has been just so generous with their time and advice. And it's just exactly the opposite of what I thought it was going to be.
That's good to hear, man. Yeah, I guess from an outside perspective, I would have guessed that people would rice bowl their knowledge and want to promote their product instead of helping you create yours. So you told him a year. You told him it was going to be a year. How'd you keep yourself on track? Did you write a paragraph or like 1,000 words a day? Did you try to go for a chapter? Like, how did you break that year up?
Right. So I wish I could say that I was very disciplined and I could answer this.
That's what I was going for, man. Come on.
I know. Well, in the future, I hope to get more disciplined. I'm working on it, but we're juggling so much with so I'm married, 3 kids, getting out of the military, other ventures, because you have to have backup plans in case things don't work out. So a lot on the plate.
But it's definitely recommended.
Yeah, I guess there's other options, but I just I don't follow those ones, I guess. But I wish I could say that I got up and I worked out in the morning early and I sat down after getting the kids to school and I turned all the electronics off and I just wrote from 9 a.m. to 1 or something like that. But that's not the case. Total chaos all the time. And most of this was written very late at night. So it was about the only time in Coronado, California, where you can have a little bit of peace and quiet because you're so packed in there and there's, leaf blowers going off, gardeners coming over, firing up the lawnmowers, always somebody delivering something to the door, all these distractions, kids, chaos. So at night from about 10 to 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, depending on when I finally got too tired, that's when most of this was written. And then I would take a solid week at a time, fly out to my friend's in-laws' house in Alabama. They have a guest house that looks exactly like, remember Roadhouse with Patrick Swayze? Remember that guest house that he stays in on stilts?
Yes.
I don't know. For any Roadhouse fans out there,
they have back in the time machine, but I know what you're talking about.
They have a guest house that looks exactly like that from the movie. And it's super quiet, out in the country, peaceful, no electronics. And I just sit there for a week, wake up in the morning, start writing at 7, stop at 10, wake up in the morning, stop at 10, wake up in the morning, stop at 10. So I got a lot of that done, just binge writing like that. But for future books, the one that I'm working on now, I'm trying to get a little more disciplined now that we've moved to Park City. We're in the mountains. We're getting a schedule. We're settling in, and I definitely want to get more disciplined with my time and how I write.
Now, my only question about that cabin is at any time during the day, and I hope the answer is yes, I'm praying that it is, did you practice Tai Chi down by the river in a pair of sweats? With
Gray sweats, no shirt. Yeah, you have to keep it true to form.
All right, just wanted to make sure. Since we're going with the Roadhouse analogy, wanted to make sure you were actually living it. That's perfect.
Great film.
It was a film. I don't know if I'm going to put great on top of that, but moving on. So you're already working on another book. Do you already have the storyline laid out?
Yep, sure do. So the outline is finished. I've filled in the outline about halfway through, and it's getting close to completion. So over this next month, it'll be quote unquote done, and that's when I really dive in and start that editing. And then once I feel it's at a place where I'm not too embarrassed to show it to somebody, it goes off to some friends to give some feedback. But it's getting close, and that's owed to Simon and Schuster by June 15th, and then we'll start the official editing process.
That's awesome, man. What advice would you give somebody if they actually say they're listening to this and they have always wanted to be a writer as well? Like if somebody wants to go and write a book and get it published, lay for me a breadcrumb trail of what you would recommend.
Yeah, so this advice came from Brad Thor, and it's from our first phone call, and it was very liberating. So he told me a couple of things, but the first one was give yourself permission to write a bad chapter. So him saying that was just very liberating, because a lot of times I think you sit down, you're waiting for perfection, you're waiting for all these things to line up and waiting for it to be perfect, and then start. And he said, hey, just give yourself permission to write a bad chapter. And just hearing that was so liberating. I just kept that in my mind as I went along, and it really, I never ran into that writer's block that people talk about. And I've heard Stephen Pressfield, who you probably know from Gates of Fire. He has some other great books called War of Art, Turning Pro. Great books on creativity. But he said, I think it was him that said it anyway. He said, you never hear of a truck driver getting trucker's block. I like that. It's your job. You turn pro. You're a professional writer. You're a professional author. That's what you do. So I never ran into that writer's block. But that bit of advice from Brad Thor was very liberating. He also said, and this will ring true with you as well, and anybody that's been in the military or faced adversity. He said the only difference between a published author and an unpublished author is that the published author never quit. So, that kind of harkens back to Buds and the bell that follows us around during Hell Week, and it's always there in front of that first phase office. So, it's just hearing him say those two things really helped out. So he passed them on to me, so I passed those on to other people that are starting down this path as well.
That's killer. So one last thing on the book, because then we're going to dig into the military side of the house.
Yeah.
Tell me why you chose to go with what I'm going to call a fake name.
Got it. Or it could be called a pen name in publishing circles.
Yeah, or a fake name.
Yeah. So as I was getting close to finishing the book at SHOT Show in 2016, I went to the 511 party, which we were at this year, and I ran into Lee Child. So Tom Davin, the CEO of 511, knew I was writing a book. And 511 sometimes has authors come and sign books in their booth, and they had Lee Child out. So Lee Child writes the Jack Reacher series that is now, I think there's 2 movies with Tom Cruise now. But
it's wildly successful.
Exactly. He's probably one of the most successful authors in commercial fiction that's out there today. And so Tom invited me to 511 party, and it was much smaller back then. So this year it was pretty big, but back then it was a lot smaller. And I had a lot of time to talk with Lee Child, and there's hardly anybody there. So we spent about an hour talking. And once again, he was the first guy that I got really introduced to that spent time with me and that surprised me by being so open and honest and generous with his time and advice. So he said, hey, his real name's not Lee Child. And he told me, hey, this is my real name. And he said, hey, I love your title, but you need a pen name. And I said, okay, what do you suggest, Mr. Child? And he told me the story. And when he started to write back in the late 90s, he looked at the other successful authors in the genre, and he saw there was Tom Clancy, there was Michael Crichton, there was Mary Higgins Clark, there was Cromwell. There's all these different C best-selling authors. And he thought that was because people would go into the Barnes & Noble, they'd go into the Hudson News, they'd start left, work right. And by the time they were in the C area, the kid was crying in the stroller, or their plane was about to leave, or their attention span has kind of drifted off anyway. They were ready to choose a book right around the C area. So he said, hey, I suggest you choose 2 short names, the last one of which starts with a C. And because he's been so successful in this industry, I figured I would be wise to listen to him. Shouldn't discount that advice. So went back to the hotel after that party and Googled last names that start with C and wrote down about 3 pages. And then I just started Xing them off until I ended up with Carr. So Jack Carr was born.
Yeah, I don't like it. I know at some point during this I'm going to mess up and call you by your real name.
That's all right. That's all right.
Is it also a way to separate yourself from the character? And I mean, I don't think anybody's going to look at this book as a research and an attempt to get back at a service member, but is it also a little bit of a way to separate yourself and your family?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do some other work in the tactical outdoor space, and just making it a little more confusing, a little harder for someone to find me. We've taken some other steps that you probably took as well, with your home, with your bills that make it a little bit harder for somebody to track you down if they wanted to. And this could be anybody from a far left anti-hunting, anti-Second Amendment type person to someone that's radicalized online at the local mosque that wants to get back at the government and finds out, oh, here's a local military guy that's living in my hometown. Here I can become a martyr for the cause. So any way to just protect my family a little bit. And as you know, we have a middle child that is severe special needs and will never be able to have that situational awareness and be able to look out for himself. So anything I can do to protect him, to protect the family, that definitely factored into the decision to have a pen name as well. So if it's just a little harder to find us, then that's a good thing. And I do talk about where I live just because not exactly where I live, but the city, just because, I can't not, in talking to people, I can't be just too super guarded or have some sort of a backstory where I'm talking about living in Maine or something. And so there is that personal protection part and protecting the family built into that as well.
I think that's smart. And I have taken some of those steps, and it's a topic for another time that I'll maybe address directly on a different podcast, but they're not difficult to do. And it does at least it puts a barrier in front of people and I think most people would stop at that barrier because they're looking for an easy target, and it's not hard to become a not easy target.
Exactly. So make it a little bit harder, harden up the house, harden up the family, harden up how it is to find us in today's day and age where there's so much information readily available to people. So that definitely plays in. But also the Simon & Schuster marketing team and art department liked how Jack Carr looked on the cover. So, everybody wins.
I tell you right now, my strategy, like I said, if I write a book, is to add an additional A to my first name. So I'll be Andy Stumpf, and then I'm going to try to get right in front of you and just crush your sales.
I think that's a good plan. You got to study the enemy, study your competition.
For sure. Well, I look forward to the book coming out. I think it's going to be awesome, and I can't wait to shoot. I'm going to say this: you requested that I shoot the soft cover with an arrow, which I'm going to do because a hardcover is coming my way. So. Maybe that's what the picture for the podcast will be on Monday. I'll sink a nice Full Metal Jacket through that bad boy and see how it goes.
Perfect. I appreciate that. I figured that fit with you and your lifestyle and your brand and everything else. So it's sincerely appreciated. Just don't miss.
Well, I just edit that part out. That's the beauty of video. I'm like, oh, take 2. Here we go.
Yeah, no. I'll have to send you a few more books. I'll know you missed if you ask me to send me a few more.
That is true.
So you're getting really good. You're getting great with the bow.
I would not use that term. I would say that I have found success with a bow, but it's funny that you mentioned that. I actually got a picture yesterday from Dudley. He was wearing the cleared hot shirt, and he was cutting off a backstrap, where he was trimming up a backstrap from a boar from the trip we just did in Oklahoma. And
awesome.
When I first looked at the picture, I was like, okay, I was going to do like this little piggy goes to market, this little piggy goes to town, but this little piggy's going on my Traeger and in my belly, right? Something like that.
I saw that on your Instagram. Yeah.
That's what I was going to go with, but I looked at the picture and I realized that there was a lot more to that picture, and it actually really meant a lot to me. And I have found some success with my bow, but it's not really, I would say, anything. I mean, I practice in my backyard and I practice shooting and do all the requisite things that I need to do, but it's really been because of the help that other people have given me, specifically Dudley. And it sounds to me like you got a lot of that help in the writing world as well too, through your intros to
Exactly.
Thor and Lee Child. And that's why I thought it was important, instead of making that, a jackass comment on social media, which is what most comments are on social media. I thought it was actually more important to, take the time to dig in a little bit. So I would not say I'm getting good with my bow. What I would say is that I've found somebody that I would definitely consider to be a mentor who's been incredibly generous with their knowledge, and more importantly than that, their time. So that's where the success has come from for me.
Exactly. That mentorship piece is so important, especially when you're making a huge life transition like those of us leaving the military do. So having that person that really takes you under their wing and is personally involved with you and your success and your family. And I mean, that's really important. So you found that in Dudley, who's awesome, who I got to meet last year on Lanai. Once again, could not have been nicer. And
He's
hopefully I'll get out there with him again.
Right?
I don't know about that, but I mean, his whole family was out there, and just a great guy. So I'm glad you guys got linked up, and that you're going down that path with him.
It's been awesome. We have a bunch of other stuff in the works too, but let's rewind the time machine, because you just brought up the military and transitioning out. I want to get to your transition out, but I think we have to wind it all the way back to what I have been told and researched and found to be true is the hardest Buds class ever was. Which was class 212, which of course you and I both happen to be in, which is where we met.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you walk me through your military career and experience, and then we can talk about it at the end. But I think it'll be better if you because we went to Buds together, but where did you go? What was your first command?
So Team 5. So you got there early. So after Hell Week, I got rolled for shin splints. So I classed back up after Hell Week with 213. So you got to Team 5 just before I did. So started that cycle when we were on those different cycles ahead of me. So you were just ahead of me at Team 5.
And for people who don't understand what we're talking about with the cycles, in that day and age, and I think largely still true, you trained for like 18 months and you'd deploy for 6 months. Especially in pre 9/11, it was pretty concrete. You'd know your departure date, you'd know your arrival back home date. Yeah. But if you were not on the same cycle as somebody that you knew, you may see somebody in that 24-month time period, I don't know, a half a dozen times, just because of the coming and going. So you're at the same team, but you're not in the same operational element. And then, our careers diverged from that point. I remember bouncing into you a little bit between now and then, but I'm going to let you take it. So take us back to, like I said, the hardest class ever. It will be class 212.
Yeah, I found that as well. But I think you were the youngest guy in that class, weren't you? You were 18.
I was very young at the time, yes. Not that I'm any more emotionally or mentally old at this point, but yes, my driver's license was pretty low at that.
Yeah, I was not going to mention that part, but I always knew I wanted to go in the military. So my grandfather was a Marine in World War II, and he was a pilot. He flew that plane, the Corsair, which is that plane that has the gull wings that kind of bend down and out because they can fold up on an aircraft carrier. But
I know exactly what you're talking about. Those are awesome planes.
Yeah, amazing. And he was killed off Okinawa in 1945, so very close to the end of the war in May of 1945, which is when 2 kamikazes hit the Bunker Hill and almost sunk it. Took it out of the war. It never made it back to the war. It limped its way back to the West Coast. But I grew up with his medals, pictures of his old squadron, of his plane, those silk maps they used to give aviators back then, so that they didn't get paper maps, because if you hit the water, they just disintegrate. So you had silk maps. So I had a box of his things, and that resonated with me from a very, very early age. So I knew right away I was going to go into the military. Just didn't know exactly what it was until I saw that whole black and white movie of the Frogman with my dad. So kept my eye on that goal through junior high, through high school, through college. I was just solely focused on getting to Buds and testing myself and serving my country in uniform. And
where were you growing up during this time? So where did you start and where did you go to college?
Yeah, so Northern California. Started. I grew up just north of San Francisco, and on the coast. But we go up to the mountains quite a bit, and just always loved testing myself. So I always loved trail running on the mountains when mountain biking became a thing in the early '80s. I was a fairly early adopter, I guess, at a very young age. So I was running all over those trails and mountain biking all over those trails, and just loved to test myself, and then just always felt this need to serve my country and test myself and do the right thing. So kept my eye on that goal. Went to college in Arizona, and as soon as I was out of college, I I thought it was going to be like Forrest Gump, like you walk into the recruiting office and then you walk out the back door and get on the bus and out you go. Because there wasn't any internet back then. You didn't know.
Right this way, sir. You're now
Exactly.
it's not the fastest process.
No, it's not. So I had a little bit of time to play around with after college. So I went to Alaska, backpacked around. I did. I trained fairly hard just to get ready, and because this is what I wanted to do my whole life. So went to the recruiter and realized you had to do all these other things: testing, take the ASVAB thing, do all your physicals. It's not a very efficient process, but I guess it's a gigantic bureaucracy, and it's as efficient as it can be. But I didn't walk through the recruiter office, get on the bus, and go to boot camp. So I had to wait for a while. So a few months later, actually went to boot camp, did my BUDS test, and had to go to A school, which we had to do back then. You don't have to do it now, but I did Intel. So I went to Intel school, which was 16 weeks. Had I known it was so long, I would have chosen something shorter. But
see, now that's where you made the wrong call. So I went to OS school, which is on the same base. But
is that like 2 weeks?
Of that 8 weeks, we worked for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I had no idea back then because once again, you can't do the research. So I'm like, oh, Intel, that sounds right up my alley. And really wasn't as exciting as it sounded in the brochure. But 16 weeks after graduating boot camp and finishing up that A school, I met you in Coronado, California, classing up with 212.
So why the decision to go in enlisted? Because you had your degree. And I'm sure you knew about, I'm sure you, in the research that you had done or you had available, you realized you met the criteria to become an officer. So why the decision to get your degree and then go enlisted?
Yeah, so there was there wasn't an internet back then, but there was more and more information coming out about SEALs. So from the early 80s, when there wasn't much, slowly over time, more stuff started coming out. So Richard Marcinko's book came out, articles and interviews that he did. I just gobbled up everything I possibly could. Patches Watson, Vietnam guy, he wrote a book. So a few guys, which is why I'm so conflicted about not really conflicted, but it's why I don't come down so hard on the guys that are writing books today, because I know that the ones from Vietnam that I read really inspired me, and I just gobbled them up as a kid. And then when I look at my kids, I'd much rather have them reading those books than say some like a Kardashian biography or something like that, because kids these days need heroes. And I try to look at all the books that come out today as, hey, it's just that guy's perspective on a certain mission or on his career, but it's his perspective, and that's all I classify it as. So that's kind of my take on that. But anyway,
that's fair.
What I got from the books that were out there in the late 80s and early 90s was that, and also from popular culture. So if you remember some of those Vietnam movies that came out in the 80s, you always had this brand new officer that was showing up and getting everyone killed. So so I didn't want to be that guy.
Exactly
you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's got like a beard, and it looks like their uniform is held together with sweat and mud, and this guy shows up with shiny boots, clean shaven.
Yep, that's the guy.
Me, guys.
That's the guy. And he makes everybody get the haircut. He has these shiny little bars on his uniform, and he always ends up.
Everybody dies.
Exactly. So I didn't want to be that guy. And that came from popular culture. That came from those movies. But then some of those other books reinforced it. So the Patches Watson book reinforced it. The Marcinko stuff reinforced it. So I said, okay, I know I don't want to be an officer getting everybody killed like in those Vietnam movies. I also want to be a sniper. And officers typically aren't snipers. I wanted to come in enlisted. I wanted to learn the trade. I wanted to establish a reputation, essentially start in the mailroom and work my way up. So that's kind of how I looked at that. And then I'd make a decision about becoming an officer later on after I'd done those things, had some experience, and could make a better decision. So in my second workup, I guess what's a way to put this? We had an interesting leadership team in my platoon, which really made the decision for me that, hey, I can do this better than it's being done for me, and it's being done for these guys right now. And so I put in a package for OCS and got picked up. That was pre-September 11th. Had it been after September 11th, I probably would have made a different decision and stayed enlisted. But this was spring of 2001 where I had to decide, and went with OCS. And it ended up working out well, though, because I was on deployment when September 11th happened. So we got to do some shipboarding stuff. came back, got to go downrange again before OCS, just because I wasn't going into another platoon, so I was kind of floating around. So got to do something, another thing, and then went to OCS, which was only 3 months, which is the exact same thing as boot camp, except instead of getting yelled at by a Navy guy, you're getting yelled at by a Marine, and you're still folding your underwear and your clothes, and it's fairly ridiculous.
Like the movie An Officer and a Gentleman, right?
It's totally ridiculous.
Richard Gere becoming the what was he becoming a flight officer? Not that I'm saying that that's an accurate portrayal, but that's where he went, right? That's
exactly. That's
fictional portrayal of OCS.
That's it. So it's a lot of yelling, a lot of folding clothes, and that's 3 months of that. And then it was right back to the SEAL team. So because I had already been through BUDS, I'd already had 2 platoons, then I didn't have to go back through BUDS again. I didn't have to go to the SEAL qualification training, which is another 6 months now. So I was a brand new officer, and I'd already had some experience, and I didn't have to do all these other things that most other officers have to do to get their SEAL qualification. So I got to zip right away downrange and go to Afghanistan. And anyway, the timing worked out about as well as it could for an officer.
Did they make you switch coasts since you came as an enlisted guy from Team 5? So, okay. So, and for people who are listening who don't know much about the SEAL teams, I get asked this question actually often, the geographical layout. And at a broad level, if it's an odd number team, it's in Coronado. If it's an even number team, it's in the Virginia area somewhere. And most often, if you were an enlisted sailor and you transition to becoming an officer, they don't want you basically going back and working with your buddies. So they make you change coasts, not really communities. And it didn't happen to me because I went from being a BUDS instructor to at Team 3, but I have heard it happen to most people.
Yeah, it changes every now and again, and if someone puts in a request to stay for a certain reason, they'll take that into account. But for me, it was I just did what they told me. So off I went to the East Coast and Team 2, and had an amazing commanding officer, had an amazing leadership team who was just transferring over from your former command out there. So they had a lot of experience in Afghanistan, and the regular SEAL teams really didn't at the time. So they brought a lot of those lessons learned from the early days to us as that hadn't yet really gone into that fray. So it was a good time to be involved in a very interesting time to be in the SEAL teams.
Yeah, it was. I don't know if I look at my career as being fortunate or unfortunate. It depends on the lens that you have.
Sure.
A lot of people, though, and I've seen this. I mean, I've been detached from the SEAL teams now for 5 years, but in conversations with people thinking about or talking about the current state or the current morale, for people who didn't get to experience Supreme 9/11 time, the sentiment that I'm getting is that they're struggling a little bit with the current post 9/11 era, just the stage that the wars are in right now. I think we're in a forever war, but I don't think it's going to be like Iraq or Afghanistan, which was highly kinetic and it was highly compacted. I think it's going to be spread out, and it's the guys are struggling. And I think if you came in with a pre 9/11 perspective, it would help you deal with that, because what most people don't realize is that the mission of the SEAL teams pre 9/11 was to work out and drink alcohol.
Still put sleep. Sleep was a very important part of that.
Sleep was a very important part of that as well. And obviously you need to have a solid tan on you at all times. But my point is, it was a very different world, and it's not Call of Duty. When I was a BUDS instructor, people were coming in the height of war, and I think they were coming in for one particular thing, or they at least knew exactly what they were getting into. And when that goes away and it wanes a little bit, from what I've heard, is people are struggling. So I look at my time as being fortunate because I got both sides of the coin, whereas other people could look at it and say it was not fortunate because I spent 5 years basically doing nothing other than chest and tries and back and buys.
Yeah, it was all getting you ready. So by the time September 11th hit, at least you had some qualifications behind you. You had a reputation already, and you're ready to go because you knew what it was like before then. And you had time to kind of process that. And it surprises me sometimes when guys aren't really ready for what they experience downrange. And we've been at war for 16 plus years now. Even when we weren't at war, like for us, when we came in, we all thought we were going to go to war as soon as we showed up at a SEAL team, and we're going to go to all these secret missions and all that. Beepers were going to go off. We're going to fly off and do the deed and come back and have beers at Danny's. Then we got to SEAL teams, for me anyway, and they're like, hey, kid, clean that bathroom and change those light bulbs and paint that wall. And I mean, you're a new guy. And so it really wasn't like that. But thinking
My first responsibility at Team 5, I couldn't agree with you more, man. I checked in and then spent my 20th birthday on an airplane to Seoul, Korea to go basically put diesel fuel in generators for a Foul Eagle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Good old Foul Eagle. Yeah.
But you know what, though? At that point in my life, I couldn't have been happier because I was at least through the phase of my life where people would stand over me and put a garden hose basically up my nose with water.
Yeah.
And my biggest thing I had to avoid at that phase of my life was getting stuffed into a locker covered in Riggers tape, which I wasn't always successful. But at the same time, when those to me, it was more of a sign of they were accepting me as opposed to pushing me away. So again, couldn't have been happier, even though that's what I was doing.
Exactly. When that stuff happens, and it is in good fun. I guess there's a line there where it can go the opposite way. But for me anyway, and for you, it sounds like a Team 5. It was all it was all in good fun and part of that accepting process and showing that they like you and all that. But it was a good time to be in, and I'm thankful for that time, that pre 9/11 time, because I got to see how the community worked, and now I have perspective on exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say it's perspective on what we were before. And I think before 9/11, I mean, the SEAL teams, in my opinion, at least, were largely treading on the reputation earned in Vietnam.
Yep.
And I think we really got to establish our legitimacy and our chops, at least in the modern era, in that post 9/11 time period, which, again, are you lucky or unlucky or fortunate or unfortunate to have lived through those things? I mean, I don't know. I can't answer that for myself. I take all of that stuff away as positive experiences.
No, absolutely. And it's, that not only was it the reputation from the guys in Vietnam, but it's really their lessons learned that they had passed on to us. And we were still using Vietnam tactics, although we're using them in urban warfare training environments and in desert warfare training environments. And then when we got to real world sustained combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, some of those things that worked in the jungle didn't necessarily translate to the deserts and the mountains and the urban terrain of Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's exactly how it was. But I'm very thankful for those Vietnam guys for what they did. That was a watershed moment in special operations history. And I think that after 9/11, we adapted very quickly. And I feel fortunate to have been honored, really, and humbled to have been a part of it.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I couldn't say it better. So we're back at Team 2, though. You owe me the rest of your career. So continue on.
Yeah. So I got to Team 2 at a very interesting time and got to do 3 deployments there. Very junior officer, and because I had that sniper background, I got thrown into some missions campaigns as a sniper team leader. So a lot of the times, an officer would sit back or not really know what they're doing in that with that skill set, but because I'd done it before 9/11 as an enlisted guy, and it was something that I was passionate about, I got thrown into some few situations as a sniper team leader in Iraq, particularly. So I felt very fortunate to have been involved in some of those things. And then the JOF campaign, which was one of the earlier times when special operations went in support of a larger operations. As you know, before September 11th, we always thought that the world revolved around us, and everybody kind of lived in their own silo. And everyone thought that if war came, everyone else would support us. And when we got to Iraq and Afghanistan, that proved not to be the case, and not the most effective way to deal with other elements of the military and with the enemy. So to show up and go in support of a conventional force operation, I was very fortunate to be able to do that and exercise some of those sniper skills and lead teams like that. So it was a good time. So we got 3 deployments in there on the East Coast, and then it was time for a staff job, which was awful. And yeah, so not what I came in to do.
Describe a staff job.
For those that don't know, there are all SEALs aren't kicking doors in all the time. There are staff jobs out there where you're sitting in front of a computer or typing away or briefing senior level leaders on certain things so that they can make decisions that can then filter their way.
The most effective way to kill yourself.
It's awful. It's awful. So, I mean, some people thrive in that environment, and some people are relieved to get a staff job. I was not one of those guys. So they sent me to Germany. Got to go to Defense Language Institute and learn a little bit of French, because they thought I was going to do some stuff in North Africa, West Africa, where you speak French primarily. Ended up having a terp down there, so I've forgotten every word of French. But went to Germany, and I hated it from the second I got there. And I should have, looking back, I was younger, and I just come out of let's say 3, 4, 5 deployments in a row, but 4 of them post September 11th, and they were all at a time where the pace was very fast. It's how I was doing exactly what I wanted to be doing, leading assault teams, leading sniper teams, and I didn't want to. And my friends were going back. My enlisted guys, the enlisted crew, were all going back into the fight. Meanwhile, as an officer, I had 2 years in Germany. And it didn't end up being 2 years because I dropped my papers, and I'd done some work with another government agency in Iraq, and they wanted me to come work for them. So
what does drop your papers mean?
It means you're going to get out. So you're going to you drop your papers as an officer, and you have about a year. I guess it's negotiable, but a year. You just give the Navy notice that you're on your way out. And so I did that because I wanted to get back to the fight, which sounds crazy because you'd think as a SEAL you're in the fight all the time, and that's not always the case. So, but I knew this other government agency that wanted me was in the fight, and what they wanted me to do would get me back to that fight. So I dropped my papers, and the Navy wanted me to stay. So they got me back to a team within the year. So I didn't end up having to do 2 years as a staff job. Just got right back to the teams and got right back after it, which is what I wanted to do, and got back to the West Coast. And at that time, I think you'd already been shot at the time, and you were I think recovering on the West Coast, getting into some of the CrossFit stuff and making your transition to the officer ranks at the time. So that's where we linked back up again.
Yeah, we both, you became a traitor before I did. I'll just throw that out there. And I'd say you were a real officer and I was probably a fake one. But yeah, we both ended up on the cake eater side of the house.
Yeah. I tried to stay as close as I could to my enlisted roots, and as for as long as I possibly could. So I did my officer in charge at Team 7, and then rolled right into my troop commander at Team 7. And after that, really, as an 04 now, which is a major in the Marines or the Army or the Air Force, it's that time where you can get your last. Probably the last time you'll tactically lead guys in the battlefield. After that, you're in more of even though you're in a leadership role, you're essentially a manager because senior leaders don't lead guys into combat at the front anymore. That's just not how things work. So about that 04 level is the last time where you can be on the ground with the guys making those tactical level decisions and influencing tactically what's going on the battlefield. So after that, I got back and took a breath and realized, hey, my future is staff jobs and quote unquote leadership roles, but you're not leading guys in the battlefield. And plus we had some family stuff with our son with the special needs, and it just made sense to get out and take care of him going forward. So as soon as I got back from Iraq, really made the decision to get out and started prepping myself for transition.
Yeah, you had the good fortune of lifting your head up a little bit and seeing the terrain in front of you and having that chance to plan. I try to, every time I talk to people who are in the military that are past the 10-year mark, the one thing that I try to tell them is lift your head up a little bit and just try to figure out what's going to be next for you on the horizon, because the military is great, but it also, it requires, or at least requests, a level of myopic focus that can distract you from essentially the rest of your life. I mean, if you do 20 years, right? I got in when I was 18. If I had done 20, I'd be 38, which is 2 years younger than I am right now. Do you Google the average lifespan of an adult male in the U.S.? I still got to figure some stuff out. And as much as I love that job and I did focus on it, I think sometimes to the detriment of other things in my life, specifically, the impact on my family, because I was so driven. It could have been bad when I got out, and I see some people struggle because they don't take that time to pick their head up and look around. And I think it's so important to take a pulse at some point and realize, hey, this is going to end, and I need to think about what it is I'm going to do next. So I'm glad you had that chance to do that. And yeah, like you said, at a staff job position right around the 04, which is a lieutenant commander in the Navy. Yeah, you got a desk in front of you that you're going to get controls of, and you're going to get to fly that thing. I mean, I would say, I don't know a ton about the officer ranks as they go up, but I would say that's probably the point where most officers make the decision to get out, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and most of them at that point are around the 10-year, 11-year mark right there, because I've had 6.5 years of enlisted time.
Right.
Mine was a little later, but it's also, it's that point where they see what's ahead of them. They're at that 10-year mark, and they can make that clean break and still have enough time to either go to school or to start a business or do whatever they're gonna do with the next phase of their life. But you're right; it's really about finding their next purpose in life. And a lot of guys struggle with that getting out, because the SEAL teams, I mean, that is your purpose. And you can't really pick your head up too much until you're in that last couple of years, you're in a job where you're not going to be taking guys down range, or you're not going to be part of a team that's going down range. So if you're a BUD/S instructor, or if you're, in a staff job somewhere else and you're transitioning, you can pick your head up. But that's why I didn't take my eye off that ball until I was back from Iraq, until I had the last time that I would tactically lead guys in the battlefield. Got to be focused on them, focused on the mission, studying the enemy, and that has to be your sole focus. For some guys, it's not, and maybe they're not as effective as they could have been, but you got to be focused there. So once you're back and you're not doing that anymore, you don't have guys' lives in your hands, and the decisions you make aren't going to affect their lives or the mission. Then for me anyway, that was the time where I got to take a breath and look around a little bit. But for guys getting out, they need to find that next purpose in life, and some of them have a hard time doing that. For me, I don't say I'm lucky because of it. It's just how it is. But with our middle child, that made the decision for me. It's you got to be focused on him. The next mission in life is making sure that he's taken care of for a lifetime of full-time care. But it's really about finding that next purpose in life, finding that passion, and also being able to leave what you did in the military behind. I think it's always going to be a part of you. It's always going to, as you can tell from this book, it's still a part of me, but it's not who I am today. I was a frogman. I was in the SEAL teams, but now I'm an author. Now I'm a writer. Now I focus on my family, and now I'm moving forward. So I've seen a lot of guys that really can't let it go, and go to all the foundation events and just always have a foot in the community when they're not in it anymore. So I saw that when I was at BUD/S, and I didn't think it looked that healthy. But everybody has their own path also. So I don't want to be too judgmental. It's just my path is different, and it's like everyone's path is different.
Could not have said it better, man. So looking back at your career, you did 20 years. What was your most rewarding tour?
Yeah, so it was probably that time at Team 2 when things were just kicking off in Afghanistan, just kicking off in Iraq, and everything was new. So we hadn't done this yet. We hadn't been in sustained combat operations since Vietnam. We had flashpoints here and there. We had flashpoints in Grenada and Panama and in Mogadishu, but we hadn't had sustained combat operations since Vietnam. So being able to be a part of that, and just being a part of that energy and that learning process and that drive, the war was still new, and then you were part of this family, one in the SEAL teams, but then also your actual family was part of it as well. So, in Virginia Beach with other families, guys going down range, families staying behind. It was just a very close knit community, and a very interesting, and it's a great time to be in. A lot of energy, and that was probably those 3 deployments at Team 2 were probably they were the highlight of my career, just because it was so fast paced. It was so new. We were learning so much. The enemy was adapting to us. We were adapting to the enemy as fast as we could. We were passing those lessons on to the next guys coming down range, sometimes adapting in days to things the enemy had changed on us. So it was an interesting time to be in. And like I said, I feel very, very fortunate to have been in during that time.
I'll steal a word that you used previously, purpose. For myself, I would agree that that time period, I think I probably felt the most concrete and vibrant sense of purpose because of those things that you just said, because of our operational tempo, because it was all new, because we were evolving and we were innovating. That I think in that period of time shortly after 9/11, if there ever was a time where I felt concrete and felt like I was where I needed to be and where I had always wanted to be, it was in those moments. So it doesn't surprise me that you said those tours.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's being in like Ramadi 2005, 2006, there was no question in my mind that I was in the right place at the right time, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing with my life. There was no question about it. And you're solely focused on that. You're solely focused on that mission. And I couldn't be more honored to have done it.
So the other side of that coin, what would you say, and again, across your entire career, and maybe it's something that you found that spanned your entire career, or maybe it was one deployment or one time period, but what did you find to be the hardest part or the most challenging part of your life as a SEAL?
I think is translating, and this might sound strange to some people, but it's almost the administrative side slash leadership side of translating what comes down from senior leadership to the guys. So I always made it a point to never forget what it was like to be the E5 sitting on the couch of the platoon space, waiting for word from my chief and from my officer in charge. So I always tried to remember what it was like to be that guy. And then when now, as an officer, as I come down with the word, as you call it in the military, being able to translate that effectively to the guys. And also, when I'm up in those offices with senior leadership, being able to communicate with them in a way that shows that I know what I'm doing, that instills confidence and shows them that I understand the nature of the conflict in which we're engaged, so that they trust me to do what I need to do downrange. Then I have to go down to that platoon space or out to a training area with the guys and talk about that and translate it down in a way that now the guys also below me in the chain of command trust me as well, because the way I articulate things, the way I think things through, and the way I perform with them out there at the tactical level. So it was a challenge sometimes to translate some directives from senior level leadership that go up sometimes quite high to guys on the ground where those decisions don't make the most sense. So being able to put it in terms that that everyone can understand, where everyone trusts me and trusts the chain of command, even if some of those directives aren't necessarily the most logical or don't seem the most logical to the guys on the ground. And keeping us focused on the mission and trying to keep the focus where it needs to be, where some of these directives and these administrative requirements, they're not things that sat well with the guys many times, but keeping them focused on what was actually important was probably the biggest challenge. But I guess that's probably the best way to answer that. And people that have been in the military might understand what I'm talking about, and or maybe that just sounded like crazy talk.
No, I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, it's maybe a boiled down version of that would be sometimes the people that are telling you what needs to be done have no idea what the reality is on the ground. And you have to bridge that gap as the leadership, because it's a rock, paper, rank organization. And you can have the best ideas in the world, but at the end of the day, you're probably going to end up doing what you're told, not what you want to do. So,
yeah, kind of. It's still building that trust. And there's ways to
for sure,
to morph some of that stuff so that you can be the most effective fighting force you can. Because really, that's what it's all about: is taking the guys downrange and being as effective and efficient as you possibly can, knocking out the mission.
For sure. So, talk to me about, and this is something that I didn't think much about until I got out of the military, but I've spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about it since I've been out. But talk to me a little bit, if you want to, or if you can, about the impact of your career on your family. Because I get asked often what it's like to be a service member, and I'm still trying to cajole Jamie into sitting down and doing a podcast with me and talking about it from her perspective, because there are some unique challenges and burdens that I think military families bear that wouldn't make sense to a lot of people. And like I said, I didn't realize how hard it was on the families until I got out. And I actually am of the belief now that the job that we had was the easiest portion of the equation, because I mean, dude, we were both front side focused, to use a term we're both commonly familiar with. But talk to me about that, living that life, and how that affects your family. Or have you noticed anything that the impact that the war had? Because although we might have been on the front lines of the war, I would say that our spouses and our children were fighting the war with us. Oh,
absolutely. They definitely took the brunt of the war. We had a mission. We were with our friends, our teammates, and we were going down range. We had that purpose. We had that sense of purpose. And when we were doing the job at kind of the height of the war, it was an amazing time to be doing that. So I think what the families are going through today might be a little different, because they've grown up in that post 9/11 type era for the younger families. For us, it was a surprise. For the families, it was like 9/11 happened and everything changed. So had they been in for 10 years, 5 years,
first to fifth years, how I would describe that.
2 years, it changed in the snap. And for us, our family just got caught up in that. It was just what it was, and it was a crazy time, and all the families bonded together. But over time, it became normal. And now that I'm out and talk to other people, they're like, "Oh no, that is not normal what your family went through. To have you disappear for 7 months at a time, 6 months, 7 months at a time, depending. To also go away on training trips for a month at a time, 2 weeks at a time, come home for a couple days where you're still thinking about training, where you're still thinking about going down range, where you're still studying the enemy, still trying to make yourself a more effective warrior. So the family 100% takes the brunt, and for us in our community, the wives, spouses stay behind, and they're the ones that are changing the diapers. They're the ones that are paying the bills. They're the ones that are going to soccer practices. They're the ones that have to deal with the roof leak in the middle of the night. They're the ones that have to deal with all of that without us there, while we have that sense of purpose downrange. So it is a tough one. Then for our family, at that, I think it was 2008, our middle child was born, and things shifted a little bit more with his special needs thing. So, and for our family, I still had 2 more deployments coming up, and I had to stay focused on the mission, focused on the guys. So for us, my wife had to really take care of now someone that needs 24/7 full-time care, thinking about the future with that child, thinking about raising your other children at the same time. Meanwhile, I'm still going down range. I'm still focused on the guys. I'm still focused on the mission. I have not shifted gears yet. So my wife had to deal with all of that without my help, essentially, until I got back from my last deployment. And that's when I took that breath and realized, hey, what's really important here going forward is taking care of my family and taking care of our middle child. But that's kind of how it was for us. But without a doubt, the families have the toughest job and the toughest part of this equation.
Yeah, I think both you and I basically just need to give flowers.com our credit card
yes,
on a weekly, if not bi-weekly, refreshing credit card charge. It was,
yeah.
And what's funny is the more I've thought about it too. I mean, you can extrapolate the sine wave of worry as well. I didn't really think much about how it affected my parents, and how their worry and excitement at me coming home okay, and then worry, and then getting a phone call from Jamie that I had been injured, and then my sister. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
It takes a toll on everyone.
It does.
And it's not just, a lot of people think it's just when you go down range, but the training that we do is just so inherently dangerous in and of itself that the families know that. And the families know that you go on a free fall trip, or you go diving, or you do whatever you're going to do. We all know someone that has died in training. We've all know guys that have been killed in combat as well. And I'm not sure if you remember this, but when Mike Bearden died, I came back from lunch. I was pulling into the Team 5 parking lot. It was a little different then because it was pre 9/11 and security was a little different. But I was pulling into that parking lot, and you were coming out, and I jumped out of my truck to say hi and walked over to you, and I saw this look on your face. And you're with Jason. You and Jason were in the car together, and he would be killed later in Iraq by a EFP IED. But I walked up and I saw this look on both your guys' faces, and I walked up and I was like, "What is going on?" And you told me that Mikey had burned in a parachute accident, and he was obviously one of our best friends. And that's that training that is just so inherently dangerous. And then the wives see that too. So it's not just its effect on us; it's effect of a best friend being killed in training, just getting ready, and that's pre 9/11.
Yeah.
And then in that case, I think they 2 weeks later they sent me and Simons to free fall school. So that was interesting.
That's not awesome.
No, that added a whole nother layer. And then we had 2 guys die in my free falls. An instructor and a student died in my. They collided in free fall. Yeah, crazy. So that was a rough couple months there.
It was, but I mean, I agree with you. It's the training is inherently dangerous, and I actually think that it has to be. And I don't want anybody to die, but the fact that people do die in training, to me, lets me know that you're actually training to the level that you should be. And again, I don't want anybody to get killed in training, but if that risk doesn't exist, I would say maybe you're not training to the level that you should be.
Does that translate over into the wingsuit flying off cliffs these days?
Well, there's training leading up to that, and then there's people doing insane stuff with 9 GoPros strapped to them, trying to get YouTube famous so they can monetize and make advertising dollars.
Wow.
But, and so my theory on training in my wingsuit, I am constantly trying to push myself in a controlled skydiving environment to lose control. I want to know where my boundaries are. I want to know what it feels like as I'm approaching the boundaries. And I want to know that I can recover when I exceed them. And then if you translate that to wingsuit base jumping overseas, I want to get nowhere near where I know the boundaries are. So I separate those two because the reality is there's no real way to practice wingsuit base jumping in the mountains. The jump is always optional. The performance after you leave the object is 100% mandatory if you want to continue to live. So you have to do all that. You have to do all that training, just like going overseas. You can do that training in an environment where there is buffer and a place where you can make mistakes. And then when you get overseas, that buffer is removed. And if you make a mistake, it's going to terminate in a fatality. That's kind of the way that I look at it. I am still very systematic in the approach that I take. I mean, if you look at all the training we did, whether it was shooting drills, everything that we did, we had a stress test involved, right? And why did we do that? Because we wanted to elevate heart rate or emotional state and give people an assessment of where their limitations, their boundaries actually are, because that's what it's going to look like in combat. Then we would move that threshold and boundary, and then we would go into combat and try to stay inside of our capabilities. That's the same way that I look at just about everything that I do. I mean, hunting included. We were talking about bow hunting earlier. Like standing in the backyard and shooting your bow at 20 yards is awesome. I think it's cathartic, and walking back and forth and having fun. But don't think that standing at 20 yards is going to prepare you to have an elk walk out in front of you when your heart's jumping out of your chest and you can't remember what the distance is at and you can't find your arrows and you drop your release. It's not the same animal. And you should recognize that and don't be surprised by the impact of all those other things when they arrive in that moment. And to me, that's one of the big lessons learned that I take from military service and I try to apply to everything is there's the how good you are with the resting heart rate, and then there's how good you are in the moment. And I have never met in my entire life, and maybe there's somebody out there, but I've never met a person where they're exactly the same. There's always a difference in the two. So train and prepare yourself that way. And in my experience, you'll be far better off, regardless of what the end state occupation or activity might be.
Sure. That's why we get up and train every day still. And I'm lucky out here that I've linked up with some amazing guys. They're maniacs, animals, and get up super early and do some insane CrossFit-ish type workouts. And great group of guys. But yeah, still trying to improve, still trying to push thresholds, and it's a good way to wake up too.
Yeah, I agree. So, and I'm going to be respectful of your time. So I got a couple more things for you. But the last one on the military side of the house. If you had to encapsulate a few, over a 20-year career, I mean, I can't speak for you. I can speak for me. There's a lot of lessons that I learned, but I think probably more importantly, it's probably more of an ethos thing or an example of the people that I was surrounded by. Very fortunate and humbled to be able to call them friends and mentors in the military that has great impact for me outside of the military, and it still shapes the way that I live my life. You got any of those in your life? Any lessons that you've taken from the military that still shapes who you are as a human being?
Yeah, there's a couple, but right after I got to Team 2, I had a great commanding officer, and I won't say his name because I didn't ask him ahead of time, but he had 4 lessons that he spent the first year after September 11th in Afghanistan with your former command. And all the manuals, all the books, all the lessons learned, he distilled it down to 4 principles for us, for the new officers that were going to be taking guys downrange. And I'll never forget these. He pounded them into our heads, and I passed them on to everybody I've worked with in the SEAL teams ever since. And I think that they also apply in the abstract to business and to your personal life. But he said, 1, always improve your fighting position. 2, he said, exploit all technical and tactical advantages. 3, push SA, situational awareness, which is military for information, both up and down.
Like a written project, SA, like
SA, situational, Sierra Alpha, situational awareness. So push information both up and down the chain of command. And 4, and this is what was most important to me, he said, in the absence of orders or direction on the battlefield, take charge and lead. So that's one that I really wanted to instill in my guys. But all of them, when things start going crazy all around you, then to take that breath, think about those 4 principles and apply them, then you won't be wrong. So those ones right there, those are the ones. There's also a great quote from Once an Eagle by Anton Meyer, which is a book that I gifted to all my junior officers and to the chiefs that I worked with, because it's historical fiction, but really it's a case study in leadership, and it follows 2 guys from before World War I all the way up to Vietnam. And one of those guys is an enlisted guy. One of those guys is an officer. The enlisted guy gets a battlefield commission in World War I, and it follows these guys throughout their careers. And that guy that's an officer is a political animal. So he's not that tactical battlefield leader. He's that staff officer that we all hate. And their careers parallel, but that political animal is just always a little bit ahead of the prior enlisted guy that lives for his guys, lives for his mission, lives for his country, not for himself. And there's one point in that book where the protagonist is talking to his son, and he says, "You can't help what you were born, and you might not have much to say about where you die, but you can and you should live the days in between as a good man." So I think that really sums up character to me. And I have that memorized because I gifted it so many times, and I write a letter in the beginning of each book that I give to the guys in the military. And then I put another letter in the end for when they finish the book that has my take, my perspective on leadership and on what happened in the story that they just read. So I think those are the two takeaways that I'd give to you.
I would say that everything that you just said absolutely applies in the abstract, like you mentioned. Like all of those principles, and I know you do speaking as well, but when I talk about leadership, when I'm doing speaking, I make a point of reinforcing that there's only 2 types. There's good and then there's bad. I don't care what your title is or your sector, and good leadership qualities, all the things that you listed out are principles. They apply in any environment. And I mean, that's from the first responder, mill, LEO crowd to the C-suite of Fortune 500 companies to, I would even say, your families and your communities. There's no negative outcome to reinforcing those principles. And I actually think it's the mechanism to help get our country back moving in the right direction. Because at least in my opinion, I would say that the needle on the compass is swinging somewhere that I don't like where it's headed.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, for me, it's all about trust. So what encapsulates all of that is trust, whether it's up and down your chain of command, whether it's with your family, between you and your spouse, you and your kids, you and your leadership team at work, you and the guys that you lead at work. But it's all comes down to establishing and always continuing to build that trust and taking advantage of every opportunity you have to do that, whether it's a quick conversation, a 2-minute conversation in the hallway with somebody, whether for us it was getting out and running the O course with the guys, or getting out on the range with the guys, or just giving a brief to the guys or to senior level leadership. That all of these things are opportunities to continue to establish and build on that trust. So to me, it all comes down to trust.
And it's a process to gain that with people. And I have found that it's a long road to gain and maintain, but it's a pretty quick road to lose.
Yeah, it can be. That you always have to be on. You always have to be thinking. You always have to be. You can't let any opportunity pass to continue to build that, because your guys are going to be looking at you. They're always going to be judging and looking to you for leadership.
Judging is the perfect term.
Looking, judging. Yeah.
Yeah. Looking, judging. Watch the movie, look at the movie. Yeah. There's some nice ways you could say it. They're always being observant, but the reality is the guys are watching, and more importantly, listening to everything that you say, and then they're bouncing those 2 things off of each other as well. Does he say one thing and then do another? Does he do one thing and then say the opposite? And all of those things, again, the repetitive history of doing those things and they're commensurate, then you're going to be gaining that trust. A history of doing those things and they are perpendicular from each other, then you're going to be losing that trust. And it's fast, man. I couldn't agree with you more that I think that's all based in trust.
Yeah.
Whew, man. So we've been going for a bit, but
some good stuff right there.
Well, I talked about you being an author and then being in the military. I know you do some other stuff. So what else are you doing with your time? Not that I mean, obviously you're writing all the time. So if you had free time, what would you be doing with it?
Yeah, it's pretty much chaos right now with everything we have going on. But I do some consulting in the outdoor and tactical space, and then I'm part of a team that has a hunting operation in Lanai, Hawaii, which is where you're going in a couple of weeks, I think.
Yeah, give me. I actually don't know much about the operation, man. So lay it out for me. What can I expect?
Well, you can expect probably the most luxurious base camp, for lack of a better word, that you've ever stayed in. So you stay in the Four Seasons.
Tell me more. I like this so
so
far.
it's a great family destination. So and for guys out there that take off on different hunts and leave their families behind, this is one where you can bring them because there's something for everybody. There's the pool, the spa, there's a Nobu, there's a Malibu Farms, there's some great stuff to do on Lanai for the entire family. And for those in the family that like to hunt, there are some amazing opportunities with axis deer and mouflon sheep. And axis, if people haven't had it before, it's probably the best tasting meat out there. And it's just
I have heard that so many times.
Yeah, it's so good, and it's just everywhere you go to hunt or to do anything is unique, and each of the Hawaiian Islands is unique in and of itself. So Lanai is just very private, very quiet, great axis deer, great mouflon sheep, and so happens to have 2 amazing Four Seasons on it. So you're going out in a couple of weeks, and I'm very bummed that I'm not going to be there with you because it's right in the middle of the book tour, and they seem to be adding more tour dates and engagements for me daily. So March is a tough one, but I'll be back out there in April, I think, with Rogan and his crew and Ben O'Brien from Yeti and all those guys. So you'll know that whole crew out there, but should be out there with them in April. But I'm upset I'm not going to be there with you in a few weeks.
I'm bummed too, man. And not to sound like a moron, but I'm assuming the axis deer and the mouflon sheep, they're not native to Hawaii, right? They were brought in?
Correct. They were brought in. One of the Hawaiian kings brought them in the 1800s. The axis came from India. The mouflon came from North Africa, and they just thrived in Hawaii because there are no natural predators other than humans out there. So they've been there for quite some time. We have a very healthy herd, and you're going to get a lot of opportunities to practice your stalking.
I like it. Yeah. What's the terrain like? Is it open or is it a combination of vegetation? I mean, I've been to Hawaii, but I mean, I've also been to the jungle section of Hawaii where my effective range would be 6 inches in front of my face.
Right. So there are 3 different temperate zones on there. One of them looks like essentially desert. Another one looks like rolling plains, like you pictured the Serengeti in Africa. And then another one is steep jungle canyons. So you get all 3 of those on Lanai. And for the most part, the axis are found in that Serengeti type plain. So it's a kind of a spot and stock type thing, just using the micro terrain to get in there to get close enough to make your shot. And then for the mouflon, you can do that as well, or you can have some longer shots out there. Some like if you're with a rifle, cross canyon shots. If you're not with a rifle, you're going to work your way in through some of that vegetation and rock and canyon type terrain. So you can essentially make it as easy or as hard as you want to out there.
I don't have a good experience with sheep. Actually, yeah, the chamois is a species of, actually they're a goat. But so far I'm 0 for 1 hunting anything that even remotely looks like a sheep or a goat in the mountains. So
did you go to New Zealand?
No, I went to France with Dudley in December.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
I did. I definitely got my Stairmaster on. And
nice.
I got 1 shot in and he got 1 shot as well. We both got skunked. Talk about a cagey animal that, I mean, it was 3 feet away by the time the arrow got to where I was aiming.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so cool you've been able to do that. It's such a healthy thing to be able to do and share with the family. And that's why we like it, because you get away from the iPads, you get away from the iPhones, and you're out there together in the wilderness, and it's something that you can do together forever. So at some point, the soccer games will end, the lacrosse games will end, but hunting is something that you can do together forever, and teaches that responsibility, that self-reliance, and you're providing your family with a very healthy, sustainable food source. So it's, in my opinion, it is, there's not much that isn't good about it.
It's a great journey. I mean, the hunting is one aspect, and another thing, hanging out with Dud. I mean, he needs to be careful. He's going to end up with like a Michelin star for his cooking abilities. I mean, there's the ability to hunt and harvest the game, but what you do with it afterwards and how you can involve your family in that and the cooking and the storytelling. Like I'm to say I'm scratching the surface, I don't even think that's a correct term. I mean, I would like to scratch the surface, but it's amazing to watch people who know what they're doing. The hunt aspect is such a small percentage of the overall experience. And I think people get so hung up on that, like, oh, you shouldn't hunt. Like, well, listen, if you don't agree with hunting, that's fine. You don't hunt. I would rather economically detach from buying meat, and I want to provide my own. And also, like exactly the same things you said, involve the family, the cooking aspect, the whole 360-degree spectrum of everything that's involved in that. To me, it's amazing. And I know for a fact that it's going to help me decades from now, because my kids are going to want to come back, hopefully. And me and maintain that relationship with, gray old dad who's, I don't know, probably cruising around on a motorized wheelchair that can go 60 miles an hour.
There you go. Yeah. Or floating around by that time, who knows? But no, it's amazing how much food we waste as a company. I think as a country, it's like, I think 40% of all food is just thrown away in the United States. But when you have that elk backstrap, like not one single piece of that is wasted.
I lick the plate. Yeah. Like my daughter, like, Daddy, I'm done. I'm like, well, that's fine. Put it over here on my plate. Cause if you had to hike it out on your back and you chased it around for a week, it's not going in the garbage. That's for sure.
I'll tell you, one of the hardest things I've ever done, I mean, from buds and combat and everything else, was hiking out my elk in New Mexico, just back and forth with about 100 pounds on my back in that, I think it was 10,000-ish type feet to the trailhead, back and forth to get that whole thing out. And that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it made the experience that much better. Not just the experience then and right after, but then sharing that meat with friends, sharing that meat with family, and getting to relive that through those meals. And plus, exactly who's touched that meat. It's when you go to get a steak at the grocery store, I think it's anywhere between 50 and 100 different hands have touched that piece of meat. And with an elk backstrap that you got yourself out of the wilderness, out of the mountains, you know exactly how many hands have touched that.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. I couldn't agree with you more. So, but again, to respect your time, let's end with, where can people find one Jack Carr on the social world, the internet world?
In the inter-Google, I am very new to this world because, as you did as well, we avoided it like the plague in the military after seeing how the enemy could exploit social networks, see who was friends with who was posting what at what times, and really essentially map out an entire command and control structure and figure out when you were away. And if you're away, guess what? That means that you're not at home. And guess where that weak target is? That's your home. Yep. So I stayed away from it in the military. Didn't have any Facebook, didn't have any Twitter, didn't have any of that stuff. But now, over the last 2 months, I've delved into the social media world. So I am Jack Carr USA on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Jack Carr USA on those. And then the website is officialjackcarr.com.
I like it. Let's end there, and we will regroup when your second book comes out. And I put an arrow through that one as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for everything. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man, it's been great to reconnect. That is all for this week. As always, thank you very much for listening and telling people that you know who think might like this podcast about the podcast. In addition to that, I love seeing on social media what would it be called? I guess the merchandise associated with the podcast out in the wild. Do me a favor, if you put a picture up, just put hashtag cleared hot on there, one word, because I follow that hashtag and then I can see all of it come across. And then hopefully, I just need to start reposting that to show you guys the love that you're showing me. So hopefully you enjoyed the conversation this week. As always, any reviews that you have on iTunes, good, bad, ugly, whatever it may be, I'm open to hearing your opinion. My goal is to make this podcast as good as humanly possible, and that's going to come through your feedback. So shoot me an email through any of the contacts on the podcast page itself. Write a review, tell somebody about it.